Okay, I've now christened the people in the room the roomies, and the people online the zoomies. So welcome to the roomies and the zoomies. The zoomies are all on mute, so if you, at the end when you want to talk and ask a question, you unmute yourself, it's not a problem. But just so that we don't have background noise, and the focus is on the presentation. Okay, cool. So some people haven't been to the previous presentations, so I will just explain what it's all about, and then I'll go into this month's presentation. So the research that I've been doing is this why dance, and dance in this question is both a noun and a verb. So why be dancing as a verb, and what does that do or help, or what effects that would have on us? And then the second question is why dance, and as a noun, why dance and not something else? Why not expressive art or sound or something else? So why specifically dance? So notwithstanding the value of everything else that's out there, the focus is on the dance. So it's not to discount anything else, but the exploration and the interrogation is around the dance and dancing. And over the months, we've looked at different aspects of dancing. We started off in the first talk talking about embodiment and how we experience the world through our bodies, and our relationship in the world is through the body. Our experience, our interaction is all a felt experience. It's an embodied experience which is multidimensional. It involves all the senses, it involves thinking, it involves emotion, it involves our totality. But somewhere along the line, we kind of suppress or put things separate or put them down. One of the big things we do in the Western world is we elevate thinking and the brain and put that above the body and feeling. So so there's an imbalance in our experience of the world. The second talk was about the shamanic body and how dance takes one from the ordinary state of being, the way we operate in the world, and the way we are the way we are conscious in the world, to an altered state of being, where and we saw that when that happened, I think it was in that talk we did explain a little bit, that there are physiological changes to the brain, and it facilitates an expanded sense of self and a connection, a very strong connection in the brain between the three senses, which is the thinking, the feeling, and the instincts. And the third talk was around consciousness in trance, very much related to this, the shaman's body, and looking at how going into trance facilitates this movement into the non-ordinary and into a healing space. I think that's what I spoke about last time. And then this one, it's about emotion. So this has been quite a challenge because it's, you know, when we started out, they kind of start out quite big and general, and then now they're kind of narrowing down a little bit, and suddenly the focus is on this thing called emotion, and I think, oh my God, you know, what are we going to talk about now, and is there enough to talk about, and how do we talk about it? So it's been quite a challenge this month doing the research for this, but what I wanted to say in going forward is that the title is emotion, But it's not about emotion in the big sense of like, let's talk about emotion. It's really talking about emotion in the very specific context of dance and what it means in dance, and the dance that we're interested in, which is conscious dance, which means that there's a healing aspect and how it works, and how we can create alternative, creating alternative narratives for our life, alternative stories that have a healing purpose. So when we look at this picture, I don't know if anybody recognizes where it's from, but we have visual cues, and we can look into this picture, its composition, even its black and whiteness, the facial expressions, and we all recognize something about these facial expressions, which has to do with happiness, joy, and elation. No. Okay, sorry. It has to do with fear, nervousness, and trepidation, or whatever. There are certain physiological movements of the face that are universal, like a smile, a frown, that everybody recognizes. So already in the body, we can recognize emotion in another person cross-culturally. So, this is quite easy to recognize. But however, yes. So, putting sound to this, using inverted commas, can heighten the emotional experience, or it can go across it. Because if I suddenly did something like this, there'd be an incongruence. There'd be an incongruence between the emotion that's being depicted and felt and the music. So for us, and this is just an introduction, the emotional component in dance, it has to do with the music that we use, and why do we use it, and what effects we actually want to elicit using the music through the dance. So that is just a little quick introduction to that. And then I wanted to just, this is a slide from one of the previous talks, and I wanted to just, I'm not going to go through it, but I wanted to just bring up this thing about emotion and feeling. So people talk about emotion and feeling in very different ways, depending on who you're reading and how they define it. So for the purpose of this this talk, they kind of come together. There's a writer, well, I think it's a writer, he's a neuroscientist called Joseph Ledoux, and he says there's no differentiation between emotion and feeling, the physiological and the cognitive aspect of the experience. In humans, it's one and the same thing, and they're parallel. But I like to feel that they do separate. And so what happens, and this was a part of the talk before, was that there is a physiological response in the body to an event. So, and we'll get back to how that happens in the brain, but if you were to be attacked, or if you were to be walking down a dark alley, or if you were to see your best friend, or if you were to suddenly encounter your favorite chocolate, physiologically there's a change in the body, which is to do with heart rate, which is to do with blood flow, it has to even do with skin resistance, it has to do with breath, deep breathing or whatever. And the combination of those physiological exchanges or physiological changes will determine a particular emotion. So a quickening of the heart, shortening of breath, contraction, blood flow stops is fear. It's like getting ready to fight or flight. The opposite, slow heartbeat, easy breathing, blood flowing to your body, so you feel also lovely and beautiful is the opposite. You know, that's the essential, the expanded. The interesting thing is that those emotional or physiological changes are quite similar for different emotions. So something like excitement or intense excitement can be very similar to anger or very similar to fear. They're very close, if not the same sometimes. So what happens is that our lovely frontal cortex kicks in and interprets the situation. So it feels the body, it feels like what's happening, and then it perceives it, and then it will interpret it and say, okay, this is afraid, or this is excitement, or this is sadness, or whatever. And then it goes on to thinking about it, and it determines our behavior, and it determines our experience, which was the previous talk. I won't go into that. But what for me is important is this distinction between the physiological, almost instinctive response, which is the emotion, to the one that is interpreted. So the Jew says they're concurrent, but if we think about it a little bit, there is a difference between us and animals. So the big question is, do animals have emotions? Well, they do have emotional responses, but they are conditioned emotional responses. They're not something that is interpreted or can be manipulated. So it is a very direct stimulus response emotional behavior. So they do have. But what's important about that is always when we find something that the animals have, we know that there's an evolutionary reason for that. So there's an evolutionary reason for the emotions that we have. It's not, so even though they with the development of our consciousness, they become different, but there is that link to survival and to our development. So what happens with this thing about the emotion is that it precedes the thought, if you see here. The physiological response precedes thinking. We'll come back to that because it's quite important. So let me just check. So we talking about our experience in the world, and this was a slide from the previous talk. And we say that all our experiences are multidimensional, even though we might not be aware of it. There is the emotional component, so there is the emotion, there is the body component, there is the mind, the thinking, there is an existential experience there, and whatever else that one can really go and investigate. And when we take all that into one present experience, we can talk about a peak experience. And a peak experience is really just one where we are totally present and it has an impact on us. And what that impact does as we are growing up, especially, is that when there is an event, especially when you're a little baby, that's how growing up a baby, um, we we lay down a memory of that experience, which is multidimensional. And that memories can be explicit, so we can recall it, like, how do I tie my shoelaces? It's an explicit, or it can be implicit. And the implicit will definitely be a procedural memory. So I don't have to rethink how to tie my shoelaces every time I do it, because it becomes an implicit procedural memory. I just do it automatically, like how we drive cars. And then, but there can, and there is always an emotional component around this. And I think I used this example before. If, for example, you were learning to tie your shoelaces, or your mommy or somebody was teaching you, your horrible uncle, and every time you did it incorrectly, they told you how stupid you were. You know, how stupid can you be? Whatever. And you take and associate that emotion with the shoelace. And down the line, every time you tie your shoelace, you get feeling, you know, and you don't know why. You don't know why you're feeling stupid. You don't know why, because it's happened so long ago, that story. So, and the other thing that we have here, which is the procedural in a way, is the muscular. So we have a physiological memory of how to do things, which leads to procedural, and we have the emotional. And that's so I'm like really recapping a little bit of what we've done before. But now, this is the interesting bit, which actually supports what I said before. So this drawing is a brain, and it's a brain that's roughly divided into the three parts: the cortex, the limbic system, and the old reptilian brain. I'm giving them all different names. The hatched part is your amygdala, and the little squiggly part is your thalamus. Thalamus, and amygdala. So what happens is there is an experience. We see something or we experience something. The essential input goes straight to the thalamus to be processed. From there, you don't have to remember this, because what I want you to remember, and the point I want to make is going to come up now. From there, two messages go out, one to the frontal cortex and one to the amygdala. The amygdala is the one that immediately will go down into the body for an automatic reaction. That's your almost like the animalistic, instinctive emotion. So you see something, a snake, you jump back before you've thought about it. Okay. Maybe when the message of what you saw reaches your conscious prefrontal cortex, you go like, oh, it's not a snake, it's not real, it's rubber. And then you go, ha ha, you know? But you already jumped, okay. Now what happens is that the message from the amygdala, from the thalamus to the amygdala down into the reptilian brain is faster, quicker than from the thalamus to the cortex for you to think. And then what happens is that when we are those babies, or when we are setting down memories in the first 7 years of our life primarily, and we associate an emotion with an event, there's a feedback loop. So what happens is, instead of, by the time the message is going up to the cortex, it's already gone into the body, you've already reacted, and you've already gone back into the pattern of that emotion. You haven't had time to think about it. So you keep repeating and experiencing the same emotion around certain events, around certain circumstances. And every time this happens, it reinforces that, that emotion. What we would like to do is we would like to interrupt that process. That's what we want to do with our dance and our stuff. So, there is this relationship of the emotion to the brain. And what we want to do in order to reprogram, we want to unlock this really, is that we don't want to go and relive the experience. I said to you in an earlier talk, there was a study where they took really traumatized people and they got them to meditate. And when they meditated, they relived the trauma. But because their mind, they were going back into that space of thinking and opening the space, and they relived the trauma, and it intensified the trauma. And then they sent them off to do some body work. It was like kickboxing or something else, to actually connect back into the body. By the way, when you have intense trauma, you disconnect from your body, and you also disconnect, your brain disconnects. So to reconnect, to come back, to deal with it, is to come back into the body. So what we do saying is we need to create an emotional experience that will facilitate a shift without revisiting the old emotion. And it's what we kind of talk about a little bit in Vedanta, creating the possibilities, the positive. But it's also in positive psychology. It's not to relive the experience and deal with it and unpack it and the whys and the whats and the hows, and that's an approach. The approach here is to create a safe environment in which one can relive. So this loop of the emotion that's going round and round is we actually interrupt it and say, no, well, actually this time round, we're going to feel something different. And I'm going to use in this example, for this example, something that's easy to identify with, and that is touch. Okay, so if you had a traumatic experience of touch and you have built up a resistance or a thing, an emotion around people touching you, I mean, I know like people who touch me when they talk to me irritate me, and I'm kind of like, don't know work out why, but it irritates me, and it's an emotional thing that you can go back into a safe environment where, through the dance, you're dancing and there's a contact where there is touching somebody, but you're creating a different emotion. So you interrupt the emotion that's there, which is the pattern, to introduce a new emotion and say, look, it's okay. And we'll come back to that a little bit. So what we're doing really is we are going through these loops where an event in life which has been a structuring moment for us and has a memory of emotion and a physiological and everything, we try to create another alternative scenario, another event, another peak experience in the dance. And I can tell you now that every time you dance, you're not getting a peak experience, okay? You're having many peaks or many peaks. But every now and again, you do something, or you in a moment where you really connect. And you can see that. I mean, you see people suddenly who might start crying, or they might start laughing, or they might suddenly just become elated. Because in that moment, they've had their own personal peak experience in the context of their dance and the music that allows them to show something. So, what slide am I getting lost? So, coming back now to the connection here is that what we're trying to do is to create these moments, which is this little dot in the middle, And we have three components in Vedanta especially. So I'll talk a little bit more about Vedanta in the context of Vedanta. And the three components are the movement. And there is, by the way, emotional content in posture and both movement. I'll come back to that, which is the dance. The music, which is very specifically chosen to accompany very specific movements, because the third component is the intention, which is the instruction that you get. So whatever the intention of that experience is, the appropriate movement and the appropriate movement, dance, the appropriate music, emotion needs to come together to create that experience so that the person can feel that. So there is quite a strong connection in this context between emotion and music in what we do. Much like dance, music is uniquely human. And I think the cats always look at me really strange when I put on music and dance because they just don't know what's going on. So music and dance is unique to human. And it's unique because of the brain structure we have, which is different, the cortex. And what happens here is that it's around our ability to recognize pattern, to bring patterns together so that we can put a whole lot of noises together and turn it into music and understand that it's music. And to see the structure. Now, there are some YouTube studies around animals that dance. There is one about a parrot that dance. So what I would like to say is there must be millions of parrots in this world, and there is one that can dance. So, but they've also done real research studies with monkeys and sounds and their response to sound. And the difference between animal and human is that the range of the sounds to which they respond to is limited. It's going to be like boom, 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 or like a particular song. It has to be repetitive. They're not able to change the movement in response to change in rhythm. So it's got to be like bam, 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 then they can do it. If it changes, they can't do it. It is reaction. The movement always follows the sound, never together. In dance, the movement and the sound are always together. It's called entrainment. I'll come back to that. And it is very specific. You know, it will be like the parrot can dance to one song, or the monkey can respond to one type of sound. It's not like it's universal. We don't have that problem. We respond in a different way. So, just to beg that thing about the animals, this music and dance is unique to us. Now, what happens? This is a drawing of the brain, okay, with ears. And the funny speakers are the auditory centers, and the funny moving figures are the motor centers. When they've done MRI scans on people listening to music, and what happens when you listen to music as opposed to a sound is that the auditory center is obviously activated because you're listening, and that auditory centers, by the way, are right across the brain. So it's like one little center. There's different areas that process rhythm and melody and harmony and everything, but they light up. But also the motor centers light up. The various motor centers. We've also got different types of motor centers. And what's really interesting is that people in an MRI scan have to be absolutely still, they can't move. And the people lying in the having listening to music, their motor centers light up, irrespective of whether they know the music or not. Okay. So there is a very, very strong connection between listening to music and the motor center, leading to us moving, to us dancing. So emotion, music, dance start to, right up here, start to find each other, even before we actually move into the dance. So sometimes the auditory center will also send signals to the rest of the brain. And it will send signals that to the lower brain, it sends signals down to the motor centers, lower brain, the reptilian brain, when it's rhythmic, running, just that kind of sound, what we call earthy, shamanic, primitive, whatever you want to call it, primordial sounds. But strangely enough, not strangely enough, when the music has a high order of structure and harmony, like a symphony or classical music or other music that has complex structures, it sends a signal up into the cortex and into the frontal cortex, the high brain. So there's two different places in a way where music is processed. There's that very instinctive reaction to it, and there's the one of appreciation of a higher order. So the role of music and the role of movements, then from an evolutionary perspective, comes down to very strongly to facilitating social cohesion in social bonding. When we as humans developed, our brains developed, but our bodies remained these fragile little weak things. Think gorilla, think elephant, think whatever. We can't protect ourselves with our body in the environment out there, as cave dwellers or anything. So we needed something else. And what we created, which allowed us to flourish, was social cohesion, communities, connection. And a lot of our learning comes from the social context. You will be learning, the infant doesn't learn by being a book and being told how to do stuff. It learns it in relationship to another person, and as they grow bigger, that other becomes wider and wider. So first it might be mother, then it becomes family, then it becomes community, but we're always learning in relation to other people. But the social cohesion is what allows us to have survived and flourished. It's a very strong human characteristic that is supported and enhanced through the music and the movement. There's like really evolutionary origin for that, for our survival. And there are others, of course. There's the dancing to attract a mate. There's dancing to scare people off. Like war dances. There's also other dances, but basically it is in relation to other and to. some of these we share with other primates. So yes, there are courtship, in inverted comma, dances that you will find in primates or in birds or in animals. But again, they're very specific, they're very programmed, they're not, that's it, they're limited. The human capacity for expressing a courtship dance or a war dance or a community dance is infinite, you know, so there is a difference in this. Music also, changes our endogenous mood, and our movement changes endogenous mood. Is what I wanted to say here, and put my picture in because it has to be in each part. Okay, so a very specific human characteristic is a thing called entrainment. So when there's a rhythm out there, in fact, before I do that, okay. Listen to this. What comes next? You can predict. You can already predict. You don't, and some of you know. Try clapping to this. And I'm thinking music will carry out that. Right. So in pain, we predict our brains predict the beat and the structure, that primarily predict the beat and can carry on without the music. So we have that capacity which is different to the animals. So entrainment is the ability to connect to the music and be on the music. So it's not separate from yourself. So and then to move to it. So once the auditory centers are stimulated and the motor centers are stimulated, we will move, we will tap, we will rock, we will do something. And through the physiology, we connect the emotion, the music, and the movement, becoming an experience. So what happens, and this probably happened a little bit here, I'll come back to that. So entrainment allows us to also synchronize. So we all synchronize, yeah, and we will all happen together. The evolutionary role of that synchronization is twofold in going back. The one is that when a group of people are moving or either chanting or moving together, they start to perceive, the individual starts to perceive themselves as bigger than they are because they identify. Okay. In a situation like a war situation, we, as much as the people are experiencing themselves bigger, that sense of bigness and syncopation in the group allows us to diminish the adversary down a little bit as a threat. And this is one of the evolutionary products of music and rhythm. When we said we started to form communities. Once you form a community, there's going to be an adversity. So once you start to form a community, you need to identify with that community, and then you need to protect it. And this synchronization, the stomping, has led to, allows us this sense, this emotional sense of being more powerful than we are, because we identify with the group, and because we do that, that the adversary is smaller than what they really are, or whatever. So it's a protective and measure. This became drumming. This became ritual. This became war dance. This became um, uh, crowds in the soccer stadium doing all sorts of things. The evolution of this movement of the capacity for entrainment and synchronization. Very, very basic. But what it's doing, which is very, very similar to what trance states do. Music will release endorphins into the brain. So to start reducing pain. If you are happy music, it's going to make you feel happier and more pleasurable, and it will start reducing the pain. It also it will create a euphoric state. It will start to calm down the system sometimes, but more importantly, and this is what this diagram is about, it synchronizes the brain centers. So it's synchronizing the three different brains. It is the ancient reptilian brain, the limbic system, and the cortex, which is the thinking, the feeling, and the doing. So when we talk about being integrated with what I feel, what I do, and what I think, this is what we start to talk about in the brain. Music does this, and music does this because it takes us into an altered state, but it's a characteristic of all trance states. So whether you get into a trance state through breathing, or psychoactive plant, or drumming, or dancing, this is what happens. And music does that. So it takes us into these states which we saw last time. It can take us into an integrative state, it can take us into the ecstatic state, or it can take us into a regressive state. Now I'm lost there. Okay. So I'll come back to that. Okay, so yeah, basically, just coming back to my notes, just to say that it's the relationship of the music and the movement and the relevant emotion that will create what I call a vertical integration from the three centers, but it also creates a lateral, horizontal integration between the left and the right side of the brain. So when we're trying to kind of work things out logically, and we stay in the left side of the brain, then we forfeit the ability of the creative, intuitive, pattern-making side of the right brain. When we can be integrating the two, then they can both feed the thought process and our problem solving, which is what we're doing in the dance. We are both one way, present, doing, action, planning, and at the same time, not planning, being creative and moving. And the two sides are integrated. So, that was a beautiful picture, so I'll put it in. And where am I? I'm a bit lost. Okay. So this is about the whole brain just becoming the music, becoming the emotion, becoming the which is where we're heading with the trance. But, so, having said that, incorrect music, discordant music, will have the complete opposite to what we're trying to do. So I asked you to come, let's dance. We're going to see the relationship now of the music and how important in eliciting an emotion that allows you to move and have an experience. Because when you have something that's discordant like that, then it's counterproductive to the whole exercise.
It's headbanging. So headbanging is not a dance.
Okay, so this here is the left and right brain. This the one coming together with the other. My slides are a little bit mixed up, so and this is the emotional. This is the disintegration. It's like, oh, but coming back. So what why are we doing this? So we're doing this to bring people into an emotional state, or into a peak experience where we can reprogram or relearn or reconnect with alternative. So we take that event, the basis of that event of something happening, laying down a memory that's procedural, that has an emotional component, and we want to reprogram that. And in Vedanta, we do that a lot through what we call proto-vivences, where we're taking people back to a state which is similar to around birth. And by the way, babies in the womb also respond to it. So it's quite early on. So we take it back to the proto-events to relearn. And the interesting thing here is that the music doesn't have to be familiar. You don't have to know the music, and sometimes you don't even have to like it for it to have an effect. And the reason for this is that there are two components to music. There's a component to music that's universal, and will elicit universal responses, and there's a component that is personal, the music I like. The problem with always using the music I like, and I like could be the culture or the group or the age or whatever. The problem with doing that is that we simply reinforce what's there. So if I say, well, I can only dance and move to a particular type of music because that is eliciting an emotion that I don't want to let go. It's just going to keep reinforcing that, which is why we have this wide range of music all over, and allowing us to use appropriate music. So the experience is, again, this is a previous slide, is not compartmentalized. We want an experience that involves the mind, involves the rational, involves the thinking, but includes an emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, the creative, instinctive, and then the body. I just want to go through that to okay. So the personal aspects of music that, oh no, yeah, just go to this. So this is, I like this. This is Beethoven, and then on the right is these the way it's written looks like Chinese to me. But the personal aspects that music has that we learn and we recognize and we know that also have the emotional reaction to us are around its style, its patterns, its syntax. So we know, those of us who appreciate classical music know that style, what to expect, the pattern, and we're going to then get all emotional about a particular part in the music and go like, oh, wasn't that wonderful? It's an emotional, personal interaction. Or maybe something else. Maybe it can be house music. And then you go like, oh, it's like this amazing part in this music and I'm reacting and I'm feeling it amazing. And then you have the in and the out groups, generational, racial, cultural, whatever, where we don't understand. So somebody that doesn't understand the classical might not respond emotionally to that piece of music. We might not relate to it, but they do. But there are aspects of music that are universal. And so this little slide here is, I was trying to talk about the relationship of music to speech. The theory is that we recognize patterns in music and we recognize emotional patterns in music because it's the same or it's similar to verbal patterns. So when we notice, we talk fast. When we want to use someone, no, the boy. Just drop the islands or whatever we're going to do. It's called prosody. It's that the structure of the sound has an emotional component in it, and music reflects that, which is why we can identify with emotion in the music. And what's interesting is that in a study, there was a study where they gave music to Canadians and people from Cameroon, but a tribe that's like isolated in the forest. And the people, both groups, were able to identify the emotional component of music in both the Cameroonian music and the Western music, the Canadian music. They were able to recognize it. However, the Western music is more emotionally laden, and the African music was more rhythmic, had more to do with rhythm and structure and movement, and kind of a different aspect. It was less emotion. If you think of drumming, sometimes there isn't that nuance. It might go up and it might go down. So we listen to, the listening to music structurally will give us an emotional reaction to it. When it's concordant, when it makes sense from a syntax point of view, when it makes sense from its structure, it creates pleasure. When it's discordant, it's unpleasant. So already we can start to identify with universal aspects of an emotional reaction to music, just through the structure of the music, the pattern of the music. The other one that react to is the speed of the music, the tempo. So when music is going faster and accelerating, there's a different emotional aspect to it than when it's going slow. So pleasure is also, or a pleasurable effect or positive effect from the music also will result when the music structurally works in terms of its particular genre. So, for example, a lot of music, let's just see if I got some more. If the music is, so each piece of music starts on a tone. Let me put it to you this way. So if you listen to any piece of music, there will be a tonal center for that piece of music. If the music, the music throughout the song or piece of music revolves up and down and returns and keeps returning to the tonal center, that music is harmonious, it's pleasing, and it's relaxed. Our brains are trained to anticipate and expect this. So when it doesn't happen, it starts to affect us. So it becomes unresolved. So when the music does what it should do structurally and return to the tonal center, and it, in inverted commas, resolves itself, we feel satisfied. When it doesn't do that, we let pain. What's also interesting is that with entrainment and the anticipated beat, like boom, 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 musicians play with that. And they play with that with our expectancy. So it'll be like, there was a moment when like, oh, where did that cat go? That's playing with your brain and expectancy, and we find pleasure in that, believe it or not. The theory is okay. So like, our brain fills it in, and then gets excited because it's filled it in, and it's made the other beat. The other thing is unexpected. So like syncopation, so when you syncopate, it's also an unexpected, and it creates a pleasure in the brain. And so there is an inherent structure in the brain of music and emotion. And music that has been used, music can, I said music can be used to create trance states or emotional states. But in terms of things like shamanic work, music can induce the state, can take you into that state, or it can mediate the state. So when people take an ayahuasca medicine, the Icarus that the shaman sings is there to guide the person through that state. So the music becomes the mediator of the state. Or like intensive drumming can take you into a trance. What's interesting is that when it's regular, a regular rhythm, it can be, this is a 1, 2, 4, that's a 4/4 signature, or it can be different, be 3/4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, doesn't matter. As long as it goes on and on and on, and it takes us into a state. When we start to combine these, the brain starts to be excited, and it takes us into these states much faster, which is the African polyrhythms. So if you take 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, combine them, it sounds like this. That's a polyrhythm. Two rhythms, one over the other. And the brain's going, and the more it's going, the more it starts to integrate. It starts to let go of the thoughts and things that are keeping it in the left brain, cognitive, whatever. And we go into trance. I just wanted to also talk, just and then I'll finish, I think, because it's that the music, why music works for us. So why are we using it, and how does it work, and why does it work? I've tried to explain in a funny roundabout way that there is an emotional component to music that's universal, that we identify. So we can actually relate to it emotionally and use it from an emotional perspective. But a completely different aspect is that we can take the emotion of the music into the emotion of movement. As I said earlier on in that first slide with the people smiling, we recognize movement, we recognize posture. So I'm just going to go quickly here. This here is Miriam Sophia, and some of you might even recognize this posture. What she's doing is a values posture and then an expansion posture. But just look at that and then listen to this. And just see what she's doing in the music. We follow the music. Okay, we follow the music. I'll just give you 2 examples, just to give you a sense. In your mind, if you want, you can stand up, but in your mind. That is suggesting very particular movements. Contrast it to this. The music is relating to the movements. The 2 work together. Another aspect is the key that it's written in. So this piece of music for us in the West does sound a little bit sad, much like this. You know, this is a minor key. You know, we put it on and people start crying. The minor. We associate it with sad. Major key. Listen to the tone. Comes back. Comes back. Finish the octave higher. Another aspect of this is the tempo and the speed. Happy. But it's going to take us into euphoria. It's going to speed up. One. So, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. Eventually going to down. I think I'm going to need your It's basically what I've been saying with the relationship of the emotion, the relationship between the music and emotion, the relationship between that and the movement and the dance is going to give us the experience. What we want to do is we want to enter into like big structuring moments, which we call events, yeah? Where we can reprogram, where we can relearn. So we can take away, not take away, but you can never take it away, but to actually offer alternatives to the learned or the remembered memory and emotion that we have to particular events and circumstances, relationships.